Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Jack Abbott finally cornered Victor Newman, because this time the tension wasn't just business rivalry or family drama. It was something darker, heavier, and unmistakably dangerous. The air crackled with old grudges, buried secrets, and a warning so chilling that even Victor Newman, a man who has stared down enemies, prisons, and death itself, felt the tremor ripple through his bones. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were measured, sharp, and lethal, like a blade sliding quietly from its sheath, and when Diane Jenkins realized what Jack was about to unleash, she froze, speechless, shaken, and suddenly terrified of how far this feud was about to go. For decades, Jack and Victor have been locked in a war that defines Genoa City itself. They've stolen companies, lovers, children, and victories from each other, each clash leaving scars that never quite heal. But this time, the stakes felt different. This wasn't about Jabot or Newman Enterprises. This wasn't about revenge for some corporate betrayal or a romantic slight. This was personal in a way that cut straight to the heart of both men, and Diane could feel it the second Jack's eyes hardened, his jaw tightening with a resolve she hadn't seen in years. The Jack standing in front of Victor wasn't the impulsive, reactive man of the past. This Jack was calm, calculated, and terrifyingly certain. Victor, for his part, tried to play the moment like he always does, with confidence bordering on arrogance. He smirked, leaning back as though Jack's presence was nothing more than an inconvenience, a mosquito buzzing too close to his ear. Victor Newman has survived enemies far more ruthless than Jack Abbott, or so he tells himself. Yet something in Jack's expression gave him pause. There was no bluster, no need to prove dominance. Just a quiet fury fueled by betrayal, and that scared Victor more than any shouted threat ever could. Diane stood between them emotionally, if not physically, torn apart by loyalty, fear, and regret. She knew better than anyone how combustible these two men could be, and she also knew that this particular confrontation had been building for weeks. Secrets had been whispered. Alliances had shifted. Lines had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. Diane had tried to warn Jack, tried to temper his anger, tried to convince him that going head-to-head with Victor like this could destroy everything they'd worked so hard to rebuild. But Jack wouldn't be stopped. Not now. Not when the truth had finally come into focus. When Jack spoke, his voice was low but unwavering. He told Victor that the games were over. No more shadow deals, no more manipulation through proxies, no more hiding behind family members or legal loopholes. Jack made it clear that he knew exactly what Victor had done, exactly who he had used, and exactly how close Victor had come to destroying lives Jack cared about. Each sentence landed like a hammer, and Victor's smirk began to fade, replaced by a sharp, calculating stare as he tried to determine just how much Jack truly knew. Then came the warning, the moment that would echo through Genoa City for weeks to come. Jack told Victor that if he didn't stop, if he didn't back off immediately, the consequences wouldn't be measured in lawsuits or hostile takeovers. They would be permanent. Jack didn't spell it out in explicit terms, but he didn't have to. The implication hung heavy in the room, unmistakable and chilling. This wasn't a threat made in anger. It was a promise forged in certainty. Diane's breath caught in her throat. She saw Victor's eyes flicker, just for a second, and she knew Jack had struck something deep. Victor Newman does not fear many things, but he does respect power, and Jack was wielding a different kind of power now. Knowledge. Resolve. Nothing left to lose. Diane wanted to speak, to intervene, to soften the blow, but the words wouldn't come. She was paralyzed by the realization that this feud had crossed a point of no return. Victor tried to regain control, scoffing as though Jack's warning meant nothing. He reminded Jack of all the times he had supposedly won, all the times Jack had walked away broken while Victor stood tall. But Jack didn't flinch. He reminded Victor that even empires fall, and when they do, they take everyone with them. Jack told him that this time, Victor wouldn't see it coming, and that was the most dangerous part of all. The room seemed to close in around them, the weight of decades of rivalry pressing down with suffocating force. Diane finally found her voice, but it came out weak, almost pleading. She urged Jack to stop, to leave before this went too far. Her eyes flicked to Victor, then back to Jack, silently begging both men to remember the cost of their war. Families had been shattered before. Children had paid the price. Lives had been ruined. Did it really have to happen again? Jack turned to Diane, and for a brief moment, his expression softened. He told her that this wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. About drawing a line so clear that Victor could never cross it again. Diane felt a chill run through her. Protection sounded noble, but she knew how easily it could slide into destruction when dealing with someone like Victor Newman. Victor, unwilling to show weakness, issued his own warning in return. He told Jack that threats against him never end well, that anyone who tries to take him down ultimately destroys themselves in the process. The words were familiar, well-worn, but this time they lacked their usual bite. Jack simply nodded, as though he had already accepted that risk, and that acceptance unnerved Victor more than anything else. As Jack walked away, leaving Victor behind, Diane remained rooted to the spot. Her heart pounded as she realized that she was standing at the center of an impending storm. She knew Victor would not forget this warning. He would retaliate, plan, and strike when Jack least expected it. And Jack, driven by a sense of moral certainty and long-simmering rage, would not back down. Diane was caught between two titans, each capable of devastating the other, and everyone around them. Word of the confrontation spread through Genoa City like wildfire. Nikki sensed something was wrong the moment she saw Victor's expression later that day, tight, controlled, and dangerously focused. She pressed him for answers, but Victor deflected, refusing to show his hand. Still, Nikki could feel the shift. Jack Abbott had gotten under Victor's skin in a way few ever have, and that made the situation volatile beyond measure. Meanwhile, Kyle noticed the change in Jack too. His father was quieter, more introspective, yet there was an intensity simmering just beneath the surface. Kyle worried that Jack was heading down a path that could cost him everything, including the fragile peace he'd built with Diane. Diane herself struggled to sleep that night, haunted by Jack's words and Victor's icy stare. She feared that no matter how this played out, blood would be spilled, if not literally, then emotionally, relationally, irreversibly. The warning had been delivered, but its impact was only beginning to unfold. Victor began making moves behind the scenes, reaching out to old allies, reactivating dormant contingencies. He told himself it was just precaution, but deep down, he knew this was war. Jack, on the other hand, prepared in silence, trusting that the truth, whatever form it took, would ultimately be Victor's undoing. Diane stood at the crossroads of loyalty and survival, knowing that one wrong step could put her directly in Victor's crosshairs or shatter her future with Jack. She had spent a lifetime reinventing herself, escaping the consequences of past mistakes, but this time there would be no running. Genoa City was watching, waiting for the next explosion, and everyone could feel it coming. OMG. Jack's deadly warning didn't just leave Diane speechless. It ignited a chain reaction that could change the young and the restless forever. As old enemies sharpen their knives and fragile alliances tremble, one thing is certain. When Jack Abbott finally declared war on Victor Newman, there would be no winners, only survivors. The aftermath of Jack's deadly warning didn't fade. It festered, growing darker and more dangerous with every passing hour. Genoa City moved on the surface as it always did, polished smiles and business-as-usual routines masking the tension humming beneath. But for those at the center of the storm, nothing felt normal anymore. The warning Jack delivered to Victor wasn't just a moment. It was a fracture in the foundation of power that had held for decades, and the cracks were spreading fast. Victor retreated into silence, a silence far more unsettling than any explosive outburst. He locked himself away in his office at Newman Enterprises, staring out over the city he believed he owned. The lights below twinkled like obedient soldiers, and yet for the first time in a long while, Victor felt the unsettling sensation that someone else might be planning a takeover, not of his company, but of his destiny. Jack Abbott had crossed a line that few dared to approach, and Victor knew that letting such a challenge stand unanswered would be seen as weakness. Weakness was something Victor Newman could never afford. But this time, brute force wouldn't be enough. Victor replayed Jack's words again and again, searching for hidden meaning, for clues to how much Jack truly knew. Was this about a secret financial maneuver? A betrayal buried deep in the past? Or something far more personal, something tied to family? Victor's mind churned, calculating probabilities, anticipating threats. If Jack had evidence, Victor needed to neutralize it. If Jack was bluffing, Victor needed to expose him. Either way, the response had to be precise and devastating. Across town, Jack sat alone in the Abbott mansion, the echoes of his confrontation with Victor still ringing in his ears. The calm he'd displayed earlier had begun to crack, replaced by the weight of what he'd set in motion. He knew Victor too well to believe the warning alone would be enough. Victor Newman never retreated. He retaliated. And Jack had accepted that reality the moment he spoke those words. This wasn't bravado. It was strategy. Diane watched Jack from the doorway, her heart heavy with dread. She saw the way his shoulders sagged when he thought he was alone, the quiet exhaustion etched into his face. This was the cost of war, even before the first real blow was struck. She wanted to comfort him, to remind him of the life they were trying to build together, but fear held her back. She didn't know if Jack could afford softness now, or if it would be mistaken for weakness. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. She asked him if it was worth it. Not the victory, not the satisfaction, but the fallout. Jack turned to her slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of resolve and regret. He told her that some battles choose you, whether you're ready or not. Victor had been pulling strings for too long, crossing lines that endangered people Jack loved. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about ending a cycle that had poisoned their lives for years. Diane wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that Jack had everything under control. But she had lived long enough and made enough mistakes to recognize the signs of impending disaster. She knew Victor would strike back, and when he did, he wouldn't hesitate to use her as leverage. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Diane Jenkins had survived countless storms, but this one felt different. This one felt final. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Jack's warning began touching everyone in their orbit. Nikki confronted Victor again, sensing the shift in his mood, the dangerous edge in his silence. She reminded him of everything they'd already survived. The betrayals, the near-deaths, the losses that had nearly torn their family apart. She begged him not to escalate whatever was brewing with Jack. Victor listened, but his eyes remained distant. He told Nikki that Jack had forced his hand, and that no one threatened Victor Newman without consequences. Nikki feared what those consequences might be. She had seen Victor at his most ruthless, and she knew that when he felt cornered, he was capable of extraordinary cruelty. The idea that Jack, someone she had once trusted, even cared for, could become collateral damage haunted her. Yet she also understood Victor's pride. Backing down wasn't an option, not in his world. At Jabot, Kyle sensed the tension tightening around his father. Jack was more guarded, more focused, and less willing to share his plans. Kyle worried that Jack was carrying the burden alone, shutting out the very people who might help him weather the storm. He confronted his father, demanding honesty. Jack didn't reveal everything, but he told Kyle enough to make it clear that Victor Newman was no longer just a rival, he was a threat. Kyle's reaction was immediate and fierce. He warned Jack that going after Victor could put the entire Abbott family in danger. Victor had resources, allies, and a history of destroying anyone who stood in his way. Jack listened, his expression softening as he reassured his son that he wouldn't let history repeat itself. But Kyle wasn't convinced. He had grown up watching these two men tear each other apart, and he feared that this time, the damage would be irreversible. As days passed, subtle shifts signaled that the war had begun. Deals fell apart without explanation. Old scandals resurfaced in whispers and rumors. People who had once sworn loyalty to Jack or Victor suddenly found themselves pressured to choose sides. Genoa City buzzed with speculation, every glance and conversation loaded with suspicion. Everyone knew something big was coming, they just didn't know where the blow would land. Diane found herself increasingly isolated, caught between her love for Jack and her fear of Victor's vengeance. She began receiving anonymous messages, nothing overt, nothing threatening enough to confront directly, but enough to unsettle her. Warnings disguised as concern, reminders of her past mistakes, proof that someone was watching. Diane didn't need confirmation to know where they were coming from. Victor Newman had begun circling. She confronted Jack, showing him the messages, her voice shaking with barely restrained panic. Jack's reaction was immediate and fierce. He promised her that Victor wouldn't touch her, that he would protect her at all costs. But Diane saw the doubt flicker behind his eyes. Victor had already crossed the line Jack had drawn. The warning hadn't stopped him. It had provoked him. Victor, meanwhile, made a calculated move of his own. He reached out to an unlikely ally, someone with a grudge against Jack and nothing to lose. The alliance was born not of trust, but of mutual benefit. Victor didn't need loyalty, he needed results. And if destroying Jack meant using someone else's hands, so be it. He had always believed that the cleanest victories were the ones where his fingerprints never appeared. The tension finally exploded when a carefully planted revelation surfaced, threatening to dismantle everything Jack had built. It wasn't just damaging, it was devastating. The kind of truth that could ruin reputations, shatter relationships, and turn allies into enemies overnight. Jack knew immediately who was behind it. Victor had answered his warning with a strike designed to cripple him emotionally, not just strategically. Diane watched the fallout unfold in horror. Friends questioned Jack's integrity. Business partners hesitated. The press descended like vultures. And through it all, Victor remained silent, watching from the shadows, waiting to see if Jack would break. This was Victor's specialty, psychological warfare, waged with patience and precision. But Jack didn't crumble. Instead, he dug in deeper, refusing to retreat. He confronted the accusations head-on, determined to expose Victor's involvement and end this once and for all. Diane admired his strength, but fear gnawed her. She knew that the closer Jack came to the truth, the more dangerous Victor would become. The stage was set for an inevitable collision, one that would test loyalties, destroy illusions, and force every character involved to confront who they truly were. Jack's deadly warning had transformed into a full-scale war, and there was no turning back. Diane stood at the center of it all, speechless not because she had nothing to say, but because she feared that anything she said, or did, could tip the balance toward catastrophe. OMG. The warning that began as a quiet threat had become a roaring inferno, and as Genoa City braced for the next shockwave, one truth became painfully clear. When Jack Abbott and Victor Newman finally went to war, the fallout would leave no one untouched, and the deadliest moves were still to come. The tension reached a suffocating peak as both camps braced for the next move, knowing instinctively that silence itself had become a weapon. Every pause, every unanswered call, every carefully neutral smile carried meaning. Jack felt it in his bones. The war had entered its most dangerous phase, the one where intentions were hidden and consequences struck without warning. Victor's counterattack had confirmed what Jack already suspected. The warning hadn't scared Victor away, it had awakened something primal, something relentless. Diane lived in constant vigilance, her senses sharpened by fear and intuition. She began noticing unfamiliar cars parked too long near the Abbott mansion, strangers who seemed to know her schedule a little too well. Victor hadn't made a direct move against her, but the message was clear. He could, anytime he wanted. Diane tried to hide her terror from Jack, refusing to become a distraction, yet every knock at the door made her heart race. She understood now that Victor's greatest strength wasn't his power, it was his patience. Jack, however, refused to let fear dictate his next steps. Behind closed doors, he accelerated his plan, gathering proof that Victor's latest scheme wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. The deeper Jack dug, the more explosive the truth became. Victor had underestimated him, assuming Jack would flinch once the pressure mounted. Instead, Jack had grown more focused, more dangerous, driven by the belief that exposing Victor was the only way to protect the people he loved. Victor sensed the shift almost immediately. Years of survival had sharpened his instincts, and he knew Jack was closing in. Rather than retreat, Victor prepared his endgame, one designed to force Jack into an impossible choice: protect his family or destroy Victor. It was a cruel strategy, but effective. Victor believed